Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
And welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I am happy to be with you a little late this week as we had some technical difficulties yesterday that delayed my putting this episode out. My apologies for that. My apologies also to Ann, who is the author that I am interviewing for today's episode. It is, even though it's not Tuesday, it's Wednesday, it's still an interview day. I spoke over the weekend with author Ann Aguirre about her new novel, The Third Mrs. Durst, which is a domestic thriller. It's dark and it's I wouldn't exactly say action-packed, but it's one of those where there is this carefully laid out plan that you know kind of what's going on, but not the whole picture. And so as you read through the book, then that picture becomes clearer and clearer, and you get more pieces of that puzzle as you learn more about the main character and her role in this very extensive plan that she has mapped out. So here is the blurb from the back of the book. It starts by saying, "Some people just need killing. Marlene Altizer Durst lives in her husband's shadow. He controls her every move, what she wears, the food she eats, and the friends she's allowed to make. If she disobeys, there are consequences, and he has all the power. To outsiders, it seems that she leads a fairy tale life. But nobody ever wonders if Cinderella was happy after she married the prince. Marlene has traded freedom and safety for luxurious imprisonment, and most days that seems like a bad bargain. Death may be the only exit she's allowed, just like his first wife and his second, unless she flips the script." So that is the description of this book. And as I said, it's dark. There's a quote on the front of the book from Victoria Helen Stone, who is the author of Jane Doe. And it says that this book is a slow, dark burn that leads to a fantastic explosion of an ending. I think slow, dark burn is definitely an apt description. What I found fascinating about this book was that I was sucked in right away. And you get kind of these sparse details. I don't even know how to exactly describe it. So you meet Marlene. She has just run away from home. And there's a whole story in here that you're thinking, wow, we're just kind of skimming over some stuff. She runs away from home. She meets up with a person who becomes one of her very good friends. She then meets up with another man who it seems like it's sort of random, but also not random at all. And then the next part of her plan goes into action, and you're thinking, how did she come up with all of this? How did she know what is going on? So you know that there's a bigger picture in play. There's a bigger plan in play, but there's all of these details that just kind of tumble down upon you at the beginning of the book. And I had to keep reading because I had to find out more. I had to find out how this picture was going to take shape, even though I had some idea. I didn't have, as I said, the whole picture. So you definitely have to keep turning those pages to find out really how this is all going to play out, how this is all going to shake down, and how Marlene is going to enact this plan that she clearly has. But it's so layered and detailed. How is she going to make sure all of those pieces fit into place and that the plan works out the way she wants it to? So that's what you have to read to find out. Before we get to the interview, I do have copies of this book to give away, so stay tuned until the end of the episode to hear those details. The book comes out tomorrow, which is very exciting. And with that, let's go ahead and turn to the interview with Ann Aguirre, and she can tell you more about this book.
Hi, Ann. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Sarah.
It is wonderful to have you here. I'm excited to talk about your book, The Third Mrs. Durst. Before we get to the book, though, if you could just start by sharing a little bit about yourself, that would be great.
Okay, I'd be happy to do that. My name is Ann Aguirre. I was born in the Midwest, and I went to Ball State University. I have a degree in English literature. About 15 years ago, I relocated to Mexico with my husband, and I have been living in the northern suburbs of Mexico City since then. I have children who are in college. I have multiple pets. I have been writing full-time since 2007.
All right. Thank you so much. Wow. Mexico City for the last 15 years, you said?
Correct.
And so I assume you're fluent in Spanish?
Sí.
Wonderful. That sounds really interesting and like we could do a whole podcast on that. But let's talk about the book, which is why you're here. Can you give us an overview of The Third Mrs. Durst?
The Third Mrs. Durst is essentially a revenge story. It is a domestic suspense as well. Marlena Altizer Durst is living what outsiders would perceive as a Cinderella story, but there are layers. There are always layers. I have always been really uncomfortable with the Cinderella story because if you scrutinize it and you kind of break it down, she was mistreated, but at least all of her decisions were her own when she was poor. She worked hard, she had her animal friends, but she ran away from the prince. But the fact that he hunts her down with a shoe and leaves no stone unturned feels very stalkerish to me and very controlling. And she's basically not given the option to demur. It's just assumed that she's happy. But I would just wonder if she would be.
Mm-hmm.
Because everything would be different. She wouldn't have the same kind of freedom. She would be subject to his whims. And whether she's happy or not would really be dependent on whether she pleases this man who stalked her throughout the countryside and would settle for no one else, even though they only spent, maybe an hour together at a ball? Right. Doesn't that seem very strange and obsessive and controlling and stalkerish? I mean, yes. Think about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's all very disturbing. And she probably never got to see her pets again. Her little mice and the lizards. And I don't know. It's very strange. And so I set out to kind of deconstruct that story and to write a version. I always pitch this story as Cinderella meets Bluebeard, and I think that's a pretty good nutshell pitch for the book.
Okay, so I think you've probably just answered this question, but your inspiration for the story then was the Cinderella story?
That was the starting point. Yes, that was kind of my starting point. But I also did a fair amount of true crime research, and there was the story of a real millionaire with the last name Durst who was a murderer and who did away with multiple people over the course of his very checkered career. It was made into a Lifetime movie, and there was a true criminal file show made of it. And as I started digging, it's actually surprisingly common what wealthy men can get away with in terms of disposing of a wife. Sometimes they don't murder them, but sometimes they will have them arrested I've read multiple case studies where a poor woman married up in the socioeconomic sense. And then when she realized it was a terrible move and that she had lost like all her freedom and she was being controlled and she would try to leave that situation, the husband would then hire a really high-powered attorney and basically get the woman charged for everything she was trying to report the husband for, including like infidelity, abuse, emotional abuse, just all kinds of things. And sometimes they would even end up having to do jail time because they were trying to get a divorce. Mm-hmm. And I found that really, well, one, unfair, horribly unfair. And so I really wanted to set out to write a story where the power ultimately ends up with the woman, no matter how rich or how connected the man may be.
So there is your introduction to the third Mrs. Durst. We are going to take our first break of the podcast, and when we come back, we'll be talking more about this story and the writing process, etc. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with author Ann Aguirre about her new thriller, The Third Mrs. Durst, which comes out tomorrow. And before the break, we were talking about kind of just that general overview of the story and how it builds and kind of defies some of the expectations that you might have for the story, how it's a bit of a Cinderella story, but a Cinderella flipped on its head. So let's go ahead and get back to that interview.
I don't want to give too much away because it's definitely a story that builds throughout the book. But you definitely get that sense right away. You don't quite know what she knows, of course, but you know there's something more going on than we're being told.
Right.
As
she is a bit of an unreliable narrator, but I tried to seed it through. I had a little uncertainty with the execution because in some books they show you the whole hand from the beginning, and the enjoyment comes as you watch the plans come to fruition. Mm-hmm. But I was afraid that might not work, which is why I tried to just seed it. I was afraid it would be less compelling if you knew exactly how much she knew and what exactly her plan was from the beginning.
Right. Yeah, that definitely gets revealed in stages. So
that was what I tried to do. Whether that was the best execution for it, the readers will have to decide. Mm-hmm. I told the story the best way that I could, and I am satisfied with it.
Okay.
And I love the ending.
Oh, yeah. The ending is satisfying. That's all I will say.
Good.
Let's talk about a little bit more about the protagonist, Marlena. What about her do you think will resonate with readers as they come to know her?
I think the most relatable thing about Marlena is her anger. I think women are angry today because they have been putting up with things and being told that they're too sensitive or that something dreadful that happened was basically their fault because, you know, if they had been more self-protective or more cautious, if they hadn't been there or if they hadn't been drinking or if they hadn't gone off alone with this person. And that's just such a horrifying hallmark of rape culture, that the onus is on the victim to not be assaulted when it should be on the perpetrator to behave like a decent human being. It's just not the way anyone should have to live. And I think that women and other sexual assault or survivors, it's not just limited to women, others can be assaulted, non-binary people, and even men. But to a large degree, both cisgender and transgender women are the most vulnerable. And I think that I tried to capture that anger, the sense that someone needs to be held accountable and someone needs to pay when terrible things happen. And I did kind of make Michael Durst, the character of Michael Durst, he is kind of a straw man for the fire. I burned him for the satisfaction of everyone. Well, I meant that metaphorically, but, you know.
Right. And Marlene,
I just realized that was a little on the nose, but
well, I understand. But Marlena, I think, is an interesting character because she does go into the situation with her eyes open. I mean, she has a plan. We don't know exactly what that plan is or how much she knows at the beginning, but she's still, you know, she went into this marriage knowing what she was getting into for the most part, but then she still gets sucked into that controlling relationship where at first, you know, she's like, okay, if I just do this, then he won't be angry, you know, and maybe I can salvage the situation. But it's complex because she's trying to salvage the situation for different reasons.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think, and that's another nuance that I was trying to portray because if you have never been in that situation, I think people tend to think that they're immune. Like, I am mentally stronger than that. The minute someone started to nag me or the minute someone started to do something that made me feel bad, I would be gone. But it's usually not that fast. I mean, it doesn't go from adoring courtship to the 180 and suddenly someone's banging your head on the floor. It's a very slow, inexorable, pernicious gradation of, I'm trying to think of the right word, but basically they erase your sense of self very, very slowly. They erode it, and they will start out treating you like a princess, and just in very, very minute degrees, they will start to change the narrative. And even if you feel like you're strong or you're mentally alert or you have a good self-esteem, no one is immune because abusers are master manipulators. And even someone like Marlena, who goes in prepared, I mean, she has never actually lived with active abuse day after day. She was very neglected by her mother, but neglect and emotional abuse and physical abuse are not the same thing. So even if you think you're mentally tough, even if you think you're prepared, no one is immune. And you really don't know how it's going to affect you until you are basically in the middle of the hurricane. So I tried to write that as accurately as I could.
Yeah. And okay, you mentioned that you did research some of the true crime elements of the story. What other kinds of research did you do for the book?
Actually, this is really fun, but like I knew I wanted it to be a very I don't want to say glamorous, but like there would be some exotic or glamorous locales. And as it happened, right before I wrote the story, I was invited to a German book lovers convention in Berlin. And I decided to accept because if I make a professional appearance, then I can write off the trip for tax purposes. And then I framed a research trip, a travel trip around my appearance in Berlin. So my husband and I actually went to Frankfurt. So all the descriptions are firsthand, like from things I have seen. And the same with Berlin, because we went to Berlin. And the same with Prague. We actually took the same trip from Berlin to Prague on the rail. And, you may not remember, it was kind of an offhand, like a Chinese tourist was fighting with an American tourist about a seat, and the conductor was trying to keep the peace. That actually happened. It was very chaotic. Like we barely got on the train before it started moving. That was how crowded it was. And then it was really hard even to walk because people were still milling around and they couldn't find their seats, and there were bikes everywhere. And we finally did. We're in a little box like Marlena, and like just all the little details that were mentioned. It was stuff that I observed while we were traveling. And I find that little details like that kind of add to the verisimilitude of the book.
On that extremely good vocabulary word, I am going to cut in here so we can take our second break of the podcast. When we come back, you will get more of my randomness, as I'm sure you've gotten used to. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking, of course, with Ann Aguirre, author of The Third Mrs. Durst. Before the break, he was talking about some of her experiences with traveling and how some of those little vignettes showed up in the book, which then made me think of something that I'd noticed about the book. And as I said before the break, my randomness is about to kick in, so you've been warned.
This is a little bit random, but there's a quote on the front of the book, and I just realized I don't have the book in front of me, but it's by, I want to say Victoria, but I could be wrong, Helen Stone. And then there's a character in the book whose name is Helen Stone. Is that coincidence or on purpose?
Honestly, I would have to say I'm going to call it an unintentional homage, because Victoria Helena Stone is one of my very close friends. And I didn't plan on asking her for a blurb, but it just worked out that she was willing to give one. And I just came up with the name Helen Stone randomly. And then I realized that it kind of incorporated her pen name later. And I decided just to leave it as kind of an homage. I didn't really intend it, but it just kind of worked out.
Okay. Because I was looking at the front of the book and I was like, wait a minute, didn't I just read about that character?
Yeah, I just like sometimes with secondary characters, it's not like I have a plan, and I'll just randomly think, okay, it's an older woman, what's a common name for an older woman? And it'll be something like, Joan or Helen or Martha. And I'll just randomly pull one out. Okay, what's a common American last name? Smith, Jones, Rogers, Stone. Okay, I like Helen Stone. That works. And then I'll just run with it. So, and it's possible that some of that came out of knowing her, but it wasn't intentional.
Right. You talked about your trip to Berlin and Frankfurt and how some of that has appeared in the book. Are there other autobiographical elements within the story?
I would say, without giving too much personal information, I will say that the perspective about what it's like to survive an abusive relationship is own voices. I would rather not discuss that at length, but if it feels like I know that story intimately, it's because I have survived it. So.
Okay. Well, yeah, we definitely don't need to delve into that, but thank you. On your website, you write in a variety of genres, from young adult to thrillers to just a variety. So, since you write in a variety of genres, what do you like about writing thrillers or suspense like this book is?
I think the thing that I like the most is that many of the usual boundaries are removed in thrillers. I don't have to write people who are 100% likable. I don't have to make everything really shiny and upbeat. I can kind of explore the darkness of the human psyche in thrillers, and that's okay, because when terrible people do terrible things, no one is like, well, gosh, your murderer sure is unlikable. Well, yes, I mean, yes, he should be. I mean, if you find my murderer super charming and you want to make excuses for him, then perhaps I have done my job incorrectly, because no, you're not supposed to want to marry my murderer.
Right.
That's not the goal.
That's a whole different kind of book. On the flip side, do you find anything particularly challenging in writing thrillers?
Oh, for sure, yeah. I really struggle with knowing how much information to unspool and exactly when to drop it in, because you really have to balance the dissemination of information, because if you tell the reader too much too soon, they're going to lose interest, and they're going to be like, well, you told me on page 47 that this was the plan. Now it's all unspooling exactly the way you said. I mean, this is kind of a boring book. But if you don't give enough information, the reader will be confused, or they may think that you're kind of cheating, because, you have to give enough information that someone really clever and intuitive can kind of figure it out, but they're not maybe 100% sure. And then at the end they go, oh yeah, that was really good. So you want to balance that, giving clues, but not too many clues. And I think it takes a really masterful writer to be able to just do that perfectly.
So the book comes out on Thursday. That's very exciting. What do you have, launch parties or anything planned for the book?
I don't, because I'm actually in Mexico this week, so I don't have anything planned, but we do have some online events, and I will be doing some chats and things, and I will probably be running contests and that sort of thing.
Okay, that sounds fun. And, well, it does come out this week, so this is always kind of a funny question, but I know what are you working on now?
Well, I just finished a few proposals, and one of them is another thriller. The other one is epic fantasy, and the other one is science fiction. And I really won't know which one I'm going to write next until an editor tells me, you're going to write this one because I'm going to pay you. And then I'll be like, yes.
Wow. Do you find it challenging to work in multiple genres, or is that part of the fun for you?
That's part of the fun, and I love being able to challenge myself. That's part of why I decided to try thrillers, because anytime I think to myself, wow, I could never write that, and then I start thinking, or could I? And I always want to give it a try and see if it's something I can do, because I find that the more I push myself and the more that I strive to expand my repertoire, I think it makes me a better writer overall. Because if you only stick to the things that you're sure you can do well, you become very complacent, and it's harder to excel. So I feel like I'm constantly trying to learn new techniques and new tricks, and sometimes things that I've learned about writing a really effective thriller may translate to my science fiction. So then my science fiction will be enriched as well. So that's the way I look at it. I'm just looking at it as what do they call it? Ongoing education, career development, when you take classes when you're working, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's called career enrichment. I'm not sure.
Okay. So is writing something that you've always wanted to do, or did you start writing later in life? How did that work for you?
Yeah. I have always wanted to write. Like from the time that I was I taught myself to read when I was 4, and I was always obsessed with books. And then when I was 8 or so, they had a contest. I don't know if they still do it, but it was called the National Young Authors Conference, and you had to write your own original story. And I wrote my own little story, and I illustrated it, and I bound it in cardboard with a hole punch and those metal clips. Mm-hmm. So I actually produced my own picture book, and I entered it in the contest. And I won for my school, and I got to go to state, which was at a large neighboring school. And as part of the state participant thing, we got to meet Shel Silverstein.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it was a big deal. And he read to us from his book, Where the Sidewalk Ends. And as I was sitting there listening, I can remember thinking, it occurred to me for the first time that someone paid him to write those words in the book. And I mean, at the time, I didn't realize this, but he was probably also getting paid for the appearance at the contest, frankly. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can't imagine he just donated his time, since he was a huge deal. So, that was when I was 8, I realized that it was a job that you could get paid to write words. And from that time on, that was pretty much all I wanted to do. And it took me until I was in my 30s to get published, but that was pretty much my whole goal. Mm-hmm. I had other jobs, I had day jobs, but it was nothing that I ever wanted to do, really.
Wow. My current self and my 8-year-old self are very impressed and a little jealous. So out of your particular journey through writing, do you have advice for aspiring authors?
Oh, absolutely. I would say the first advice I have is just don't give up. I'm paraphrasing, and I can't remember who said it, but essentially every professional author is an amateur who didn't quit. I think it may have been Stephen King as Richard Bachman who said that, but it's very correct. There will be a lot of obstacles, and you will probably get a lot of pushback from people who are like, you're wasting your time. It's never going to happen. You have to know someone, or you have to have a platform, or you have to already be famous. I am here to say that that is absolutely incorrect because I did not have a platform. I wasn't already famous. I didn't know anyone. I just kept writing. I mean, I did write probably 12 books, or if not more, before I found one that an agent thought was saleable. And it's basically like anything else. If you quit, you are definitely never going to succeed. I can't provide any guarantees that you will succeed even if you don't quit, but if you quit, you will definitely never succeed as a writer. So
Right.
the number one advice is just don't quit. But that is a lot harder than it sounds, especially if you're coming up with rejection after rejection after rejection. And, for some people, just the constant erosion of your belief in yourself, it is really hard to keep going, even when people tell you, actually you're bad at this, you're really bad at this. I remember my most painful rejection from an editor, and I'm not going to say who it was, but I had an agent at the time and we still hadn't sold. And this editor came back with this feedback: Ms. Aguirre may wish to reconsider her desire to be a writer.
Oh.
Like, yikes. Not, this book is not for me, or, X needs work. Like, just stop. Like, don't do this. And I was like, yikes. And I still can quote that rejection to this day. And even now, I will not let my agent send anything to this writer or to this editor, even though I have at this point sold 45 books.
Right. Right. Well, that's impressive that you didn't give up. Some people would take that and be like, okay, maybe this is a sign.
Well, I did wallow for a couple of days and was like, wow, I really am terrible. And then I was like, well, you know what? I do have an agent. She thought I was good enough to send me out on submission. This is one person's opinion. I'll just keep trying.
Mm-hmm. Good for you.
And eventually I did hit on a project that was the right place, right time, right editor. And once you get the foot in the door, it does become easier. You're not a shoo-in even after you sell your first book. There are still problems. But again, like, the key to building a career is the same as, like, getting started. Like, just don't quit. Keep trying. You're going to have ups and downs just like any other road, but you just have to keep moving. And that's really, it's the simplest advice, but it's also the hardest.
Absolutely.
Because I do completely empathize. I know how hard it is to keep going, especially when people who are close to you may say you're unrealistic or that it's a pipe dream or whatever. I will say that one thing that inspired me to keep going was Sharon Shin. She's a fantasy writer, and she also lived in the Midwest, and she wasn't anyone famous as far as I knew. Like, as far as I knew, she was just a woman living in the Midwest who got published, even though she wasn't famous, she wasn't connected. And I looked at her as I was struggling, and I was like, that's proof that it can happen as long as you keep trying. And that was kind of what gave me the courage to keep going. And I hope maybe when people look at my career, they can say, here's a woman who was born in the Midwest. She was not anyone special, and she also got published. So,
yeah. All right. In terms of reading, then, do you have favorite authors or genres that you turn to when you want to read?
Oh, definitely. Sharon Shin has long been one of my favorites. I've been reading her since I was in college, basically. Rachel Kane writes amazing thrillers. I think Stillhouse Lake is as close to perfect as you can get. I really like Kate Elliott. In romance, there are just so many. Alyssa Cole, Courtney Milan. And in thrillers, I tend to read the premise more than the author. So it's a little hard for me to name a bunch of thriller authors that I've read, because I usually like, oh, that's a really cool concept, and I'll read the book, and I may not necessarily remember who wrote it, because honestly, my head for names is not what it used to be. That's something I struggle with at conferences. Even if I have met people, I'm like, please let me be able to see the name tag, because I know I have met this person before, but I do not recall your name, and that's bad. Right. I have the same problem when I'm at parties with my husband, because he's the CEO of a pharmaceutical company here, and we go to cocktail things, and I will meet people, and pretty much 5 minutes after I met them, I am not able to remember what their name was. And that's really not good. But
yes, I understand. My husband is really good with faces and not good with names. So.
Oh, really? He's like, yeah. I know you, but I don't remember who you are.
I do not. Yeah. So we go. It actually took him like 5 years to remember one of my coworkers' names.
Oh no!
Like he never. So, yeah, I completely sympathize with that. Good. In terms of, let's see, I know you have a website, so if you could tell us the website address and then any social media that people can find you on.
Okay. I am at www.annaguirre.com, and I am on Twitter at Ms. Ann Aguirre. I have a Facebook fan page at facebook.com Ann_Aguirre. And I am on Instagram as author Ann Aguirre. Okay. I can't remember if there's an underscore in it or not. I think there may be. But I think if you just Google Ann Aguirre Instagram, you should be able to find it.
Okay, and I would assume that there are links on your website for all your social media?
Yes, there are links on my website on, I want to say, the contact page.
Okay.
And you can also find my email there, too.
Thank you. We've talked about a variety of topics, but is there anything that we haven't covered in terms of the book, or just anything else that you want to mention now?
Well, the book comes out on August 8th. And I hope you'll check it out. Anything else that you're interested in, you can find out more about my work on my website. I do write paranormal romance. I have an urban fantasy series. I have 2 different science fiction series. I have a dystopian saga in young adult. So it would be pretty hard not to find something that might intrigue you on my website, I think.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time today to talk to me about the book. It is The Third Mrs. Durst, and it comes out on Thursday. So, Ann, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
And once again, thank you to Ann for joining me to talk about this really fabulous book. Thank you to you, my listeners, as always. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, I do have copies of this to give away. So if you go to our social media pages, GSMC Book Review, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and comment on the post that lists this episode, it is episode 173, of course, interview with Ann Aguirre. You can comment on that post and enter to win a copy of The Third Mrs. Durst. So again, that is GSMC Book Review, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Those links are in the description of this show. You can find them on our website, etc. As always, if you would like and share and follow and do all those wonderful things that help us out so much in the world of social media, it would be greatly appreciated. But if you do want a copy of this book, to be entered for a copy of this book, make sure you comment on one of those social media sites. So thank you once again to Ann. Thank you as always to you. I hope you're having a wonderful week with fewer technical difficulties than I have experienced. And I hope that that week involves some time to get yourself lost in a good book. Talk to you next time.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast. part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.